Hello, everyone, and a very good evening. Welcome to today's discussion program on JSJC TV. Stockwell Day once said, I believe in freedom of speech, but I believe we should have the right to comment on freedom of speech. As a fundamental citizen of India, under Article 19 of the Constitution, everyone has the right to freedom of expression and speech. But with changing times, this right has evolved in multiple ways, especially with the onset of social media that sometimes allow limitless voices to reach limitless audiences, but can also be the same reason to restrict someone for voicing their opinion. People have expanded their horizons from the word of mouth to connecting with each other from miles apart, which also opens up a source of expression. And just for that, I am Amyatal Reja with an exciting bunch of panelists with me here to discuss whether social media hinders or helps free speech. First of all, I would like to welcome Ms. Courtney Erin Morris, who is a professor of legal practice at the Jindal Global Law School. She is a State Department Criminal Justice Advisor, school board president, and has been a video journalist for New York Times. Hello, Ms. Courtney. Welcome.
Hello, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Next, she has been committed to the protection of free speech and expression, particularly from a journalistic perspective. Next up, we have Mr. Rishab Agarwal, who is a final year law student at OP Jindal Global University and is extremely interested in arbitration, international law, and digital/slash social media. Hi, Rishab, welcome. You're on mute, Rishab. Could you unmute yourself?
Yeah,
Yes.
hi. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm here.
Yes. And lastly, we have Miss Sana Mittal, who is a second year student at the University of Warwick and the founder and president of Global Volunteers Action Network that promotes to create a space which will empower people to contribute towards UN SDGs. Hi, Sana.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Without any further ado, I would like to ask Miss Courtney Morris the first question as to where should one draw the line of free expression over social media.
Well, first I'd like to say that I I liked your introduction and I guess my fundamental free speech roots, I believe in a very strong and robust right to free speech and expression as articulated in Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. I think the beauty of social media is it has done just what you described, which it has given a platform for speech and expression to so many more people, hundreds of millions of people across the globe that might not have had access to forums for speech before. We think of the origins of free speech and expression not only in India, but also in the United States, which is where I'm from. And I do a comparative course looking at free speech in both countries. And while there was an articulated right to speech, say in the United States in the late 1700s, not everybody had that right to speech. The thought was there, but it wasn't available to everybody. And so I think that social media at base has given us much more speech, which I think on the whole is a good thing. But as we've seen, we've now got a couple of problems on social media. One, of course, is the proliferation of misinformation. The other is hate speech, which has definitely been a problem in India. The other is the control of speech by these private social media platforms, platforms where the users have expectation of having their thoughts be shared, only to find that their thoughts are taken down, including people like President Donald Trump. So we definitely have to figure out where the line is. I have some ideas, but I'd like to hear from the others too.
Definitely. So, Miss Sana, my next question is to you. What do you think about what Miss Courtney just said? And I'm aware that you use social media for a great cause. Have you ever felt that you need to draw any line somewhere, or maybe you need to take a step back from freely expressing yourself?
Right. I think in my organization at G1, we've used social media as a means of communication because we started as a remote organization and our working entirely was based through our communications through social media. And during the second wave of COVID in India, we tried to create a repository of content and resources that was freely available to people. Now, while social media was a blessing in disguise at that point, we could reach out to so many people. We helped more than 5,000 people with medical resources, hospital beds, or oxygen cylinders during that time. It also became a problem. And like Ms. Courtney mentioned, that there was a lot of misinformation and a lot of hate speech, which was not regulated at that time, especially during the COVID pandemic, when we were all forced into a very remote working environment. And I think we at Jeevan, we worked to create this repository, which was later even taken down because there were a lot of guidelines that highlighted that many of these repositories were, providing fake information to a lot of people. However, we knew that we were constantly 24/7 trying to sort of verify these leads and help people through that. But it was a time when almost all of these repositories just vanished from the internet. At the same time, I think I've also worked with social media when it comes to advocacy and campaigning. And it was during the first wave of COVID when I worked with the organization called VILAC. And we worked on a campaign called the Corona campaign. And we were creating content to create awareness about misinformation and hate speech on social media and how that needs to be regulated when it comes to such an environment. So I think while social media was definitely a force of bringing people together in a remote environment, it also became became the main propagator of hate speech, fake news, misinformation, which led to more adversity during such a time of crisis. So I think that regulation needs to come into force. And yeah, I think I'll hear more from Rishabh.
Yes, after that you mentioned, a lot of some of your posts were taken down at Jeevan. For that only, I'll come to Rishabh as I stumbled upon one of your recent papers, which was a discourse on the constitutionality of the Progressive IT Rules 2021. Could you just briefly explain as to what changes have been implemented under the IT rules?
Right. So, hi everyone. I would like to start off by stating that I believe the social media and its regulation in India, especially now under the new IT rules, severely hampers freedom of speech as guaranteed under the Indian Constitution. So, as understood under the Constitution, the freedom of speech and expression is a complex right. This is primarily because it's not absolute and it carries with it special duties and responsibilities provided by law. So, this is primarily what I'm going to talk about. And I will be dropping in this. Like my the link to my paper on the chat box, so you are free to reach out for any questions. Basically, my article it talks about the several of the challenges brought on about this newly legislated law, that is the IT rules. So, firstly, we see how they infringe upon the right to privacy. With the introduction of these rules, the obligation of significant social intermediaries to trace the first originator of information effectively breaks down end to end encryption. So, we see this in platforms like Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp. Uh, so, we see that this violates not only the fundamental right to privacy, but also the freedom to speech and expression under these social media platforms. Secondly, while amending the pre-existing IT rules which were in place, the government passed on these rules on its own volition. So, another argument against the constitutionality of these IT rules was that it is ultra vires the constitution, which basically means that it lies outside the scope of what the parent legislation aims to address. So there was a shimmer of hope in this saga, and on 14th August 2021, the Bombay High Court ruled that people. I'm just going to be quoting a paragraph from this judgment. Uh, so Justice Kulkarni said that people would be starved of the liberty of thought and feel suffocated to exercise the right to freedom of speech and expression if they are made to live in present times of and content regulation on the internet with the code of ethics hanging over their head as the sword of Damocles. This regime would clearly run contrary to the well organized and well recognized constitutional ethos and principles. So, just to sum up my talk, in the words of senior advocate Darius Khambata, these rules are for the most part draconian and have a chilling effect on the freedom of speech and expression. So the recent Bombay High Court judgment is a step in the right direction for people advocating for online free speech and individual privacy. However, we see that a great deal remains to be done in order to invalidate the oppressive provisions of this new IT law. So the need of the hour is the judicial recognition of its unconstitutionality and intervention and oversight by the judiciary will have an appreciable impact on online speech and expression, blanket privacy, and user rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishabh. Moving on to Miss Courtney. In a recent article by New York Times that I read, they said that, Twitter calls on the Indian government to respect free speech of their citizens and the staff who is working in India via Twitter. What do you think about that? And can you also explain with the help of examples from, a comparative example from the US and India? I'll tell you more about that article. So Twitter, reached out to the Indian government where specifically to state the fact that Indian government always tries to, have a certain amount of restrictions on what Indians are posting on Twitter, because allegedly there are some stuff that is being posted about the prime minister of our country. And for that, the Indian government reaches out to Twitter, like the headquarters of Twitter, and they mostly wish to have like a reasonable restrictions. What do you have to say about that?
Right. So, what's curious about these social media platforms is, as I said, the users have expectations of speech and expression because they're such big forums. And typically, and for a long time, until relatively recently, there wasn't a great deal of restriction on what people have said or are saying. Now, of course, not only in India, but in the United States as well, we see kind of the hue and cry from the government to have these platforms restrict speech. And of course, these platforms, first of all, legally are not obligated to allow any and all speech. They are private organizations. They are not state actors. And so they do not have any requirement to allow unadulterated speech. They can restrict speech. The US Supreme Court and lower courts have said that in the United States, and that also has been picked up in judgments here in India. The problem is that there are some countries, India being definitely one of them, where there are so many users in India. That is one of the biggest bases, for monetization and whatever else of these platforms. And so in order to continue operating in countries like India, the Philippines is another example, there is an unclear relationship, frankly, between the social media platform and the government that's regulating them. And there's a possibility that the kind of speech you're going to be seeing taken down is speech critical of the government. And so that definitely is, I would say, an incursion onto speech rights. There was a case a couple of years ago by a senior advocate. His name was Sanjay Hedgay, I think, or Hegde. And he actually reposted a few things on Twitter. One was a sort of a poem he had reposted that was sympathetic to labor in India and could be considered to be a sort of communist-inspired poem. And he posted another thing too, and he was kicked off Twitter completely for the posts that he had retweeted essentially, clearly expressing his political philosophy or his political leanings. And so, it definitely raises the question about who Twitter is trying to please, right, by cutting down speech like that. And certainly I completely agree with my fellow panelist about the media rules. This is just a way, these types of media rules are a way to control. I'm talking about social media specifically, although they're much broader than that, I realize. A way to potentially control speech that is speech the government doesn't like. And that's when we get into trouble, where we see, I would say, for lack of a better word, a partnership between social media platforms and governments wanting to restrict speech. Donald Trump was doing this all over the place. He called Jack Dorsey and, Mark Zuckerberg and all those people to Congress to face really, really harsh questioning about the rules they were putting in place. I mean, governments across the globe want to do this. They want to use these platforms in the way that they want, but then restrict it for people who are speaking out against them. And that is a tricky aspect of where we draw that line.
I'm sorry to cut you short, but I'm afraid that was all the time we had today. And I would like to thank all my panelists for being here and sharing such insightful thought. It was honestly, I personally learned a lot of things conducting this panel discussion or being the moderator, and I'm sure all our viewers did as well. I would have personally loved to talk for you all to more and listen to some exciting observations. But thank you so much. And I hope this discussion helped all our viewers as well. So please take care and have a great day. Don't forget to subscribe to JSJC TV for more exciting panel discussions. And I will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amaya.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you for being here.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.